On March 15th, 2023, an event occurred that most Americans completely ignored, yet it signals the end of the world as we know it. Saudi Arabia officially agreed to accept the Chinese yuan for oil sales, breaking the petrodollar monopoly established in 1974. This was not merely a trade deal. It was stage 6 of an 8-stage collapse pattern that has historically annihilated every reserve currency. This mathematical script is not new. It destroyed the Portuguese real in the 1600s, the Dutch guilder in the 1700s, and the British pound in the 1900s. Now, the United States is repeating the exact same sequence. With our national debt reaching $36 trillion, the 50-year free lunch of printing paper to buy real goods is ending. The paradox is simple. When you weaponize your currency, you force the rest of the world to find an alternative. The question is no longer if the dollar will fall, but how it will collapse and what that means for every dollar you have saved. In this documentary, I will decode the 8-stage cycle, prove why we have passed the point of no return, and show you exactly where the wealth will transfer next. To truly grasp why the system is fracturing, you must understand the hidden mechanism of the greatest wealth extraction in human history. In macroeconomics, we call this exorbitant privilege. For 50 years, the United States has operated on a free lunch that no other civilization has ever maintained for so long. The logic is as simple as it is devastating. Since the 1974 agreement with Saudi Arabia, the entire world was effectively forced to trade oil exclusively in US dollars. This created a permanent artificial demand for our currency that defied the laws of traditional economics. Think about the mathematical trap. Every other nation on earth must produce something of actual value, wheat, steel, or technology, just to earn the dollars required to power their economies. But the United States, we simply print the paper. We export digital entries and green ink, and in return, we receive the world's most precious physical resources. We have spent half a century exporting our inflation, forcing billions of people across the globe to hold our debt while we consumed their labor and resources. This free lunch allowed us to accumulate $36 trillion in debt without the immediate pain of hyperinflation. But the paradox of power is that it eventually overreaches. By weaponizing the dollar through sanctions and seizing foreign assets, we broke the most sacred rule of money: trust. Now, the world is moving toward a multipolar system. The moment the global demand for dollars drops, those trillions of exported units will flood back to American shores. The 50-year party is over, and the check has finally arrived. The math is cold, calculated, and absolutely inescapable. To the untrained eye, history looks like a chaotic series of random accidents, but to a student of macrocycles, it is a cold, rhythmic pulse of mathematics. For the past 500 years, every global reserve currency has followed an identical 8-stage path toward total annihilation. This is the master map, a historical constant that has governed the rise and fall of every empire from the Portuguese to the British with terrifying precision. The cycle starts with stage 1, stability backed by hard assets. This matures into stage 2, absolute global dominance. However, dominance inevitably breeds arrogance, leading to stage 3, imperial overextension. And this is where the empire begins funding endless wars through massive debt instead of real production. By stage 4, the internal wealth gap explodes, and the elite begin cannibalizing their own economy to maintain the illusion of prosperity. Stage 5 is the fatal turning point, the weaponization of the currency. When a superpower begins using its money as a tool for sanctions, it destroys the global trust that once gave it value. This leads directly to stage 6, the stage we entered in 2023. This is the moment viable alternatives emerge. Whether it is the rise of the BRICS alliance or the return to gold-backed trade, the world has begun its exit. Stage 7 is the sudden, violent panic as confidence evaporates, leading finally to stage 8, the total systemic reset. The mathematical reality of this 8-stage pattern is that it is irreversible. We have already cleared the first 5 hurdles. History teaches us one thing: once an empire reaches stage 6, it never returns to glory. It only awaits the reset. Picture London in the late 19th century. The British pound sterling was the undisputed sun around which the entire financial universe orbited. It was more than just money. It was a global promise, backed by the world's most dominant navy and a gold standard that seemed immortal. But the archives of history reveal a cold, mathematical truth that the elite always try to hide. No amount of military might can outrun the gravity of debt. Between 1914 and 1945, the British Empire committed the ultimate systemic sin. They funded 2 catastrophic global wars by borrowing trillions from their future, transforming from the world's largest creditor into its most desperate debtor. By the end of World War II, the United Kingdom was mathematically bankrupt. Their debt-to-gross domestic product ratio had exploded to over 250%. The free lunch they had enjoyed for over a century, where they could print their currency to dominate global trade, hit a wall of reality called Bretton Woods. In 1949, the inevitable happened. The British government was forced to devalue the pound by 30% in a single move. For the global elite, this was a strategic adjustment, but for the ordinary British citizen, it was a violent theft of their reality. I want you to feel the weight of this. Imagine waking up to find that 30% of your life's savings, your pension, and your purchasing power had simply evaporated because the politicians overreached. This is where the human cost of a stage 6 collapse becomes visible. Long after the guns fell silent in Europe, British families were still living under strict rationing. Why? Not because there was no food in the world, but because the British pound no longer had the strength to buy it. The currency had lost its exorbitant privilege. The final nail in the coffin was the Suez Crisis of 1956, the ultimate example of currency weaponization used against its creator. When the United States threatened to dump British government bonds and crash the pound, the empire was forced to surrender its geopolitical interests in a matter of weeks. They realized, too late, that their currency was no longer a shield, but a collar held by their new master. Now, look at America in 2025. We are staring into the same historical mirror. We have the same overextended military bases, the same $36 trillion in unpayable debt, and the same arrogance that led the British to believe their dominance was permanent. The math is screaming at us. When a reserve currency loses its monopoly, the pain is always felt first by the people holding the paper. The ordinary American family is currently standing on the same trapdoor that dropped the British middle class into decades of decline. History does not repeat, but for those who understand the 8-stage pattern, it is currently screaming the same warning. History is not merely a collection of dates, it is a recurring frequency of human failure. To believe the United States is immune to this cycle is to ignore the mathematical wreckage left behind by the Portuguese real and the Dutch guilder. In the 1600s, Portugal was the undisputed master of the oceans. Their currency was the global standard for the lucrative spice trade, backed by real gold and physical conquest, but they inevitably fell into the Stage 3 trap, imperial overextension. They spent wealth that they had not yet earned on colonial wars they could not sustain. By the time they reached the Stage 6 threshold, their currency had become a hollow shell of debt. The world did not rebel with weapons, it simply stopped accepting Portuguese paper. The same frequency played out with chilling precision in the 1700s with the Dutch Republic. The guilder was the first true global reserve currency of the modern financial era, supported by the Dutch East India Company and the most advanced banking system the world had ever seen. Yet the pattern remained undefeated. As the empire aged, the Dutch elite transitioned from actual trade and production to financial manipulation and excessive leverage. They funded their luxury by printing guilders and borrowing against a future that was mathematically impossible to reach. When they attempted to maintain dominance through financial warfare rather than economic value, they triggered the Stage 6 exit. Global capital fled to the British pound, leaving the Dutch with a mountain of unpayable debt and a currency that history eventually forgot. These are not accidents of fate. They are the laws of financial gravity. Every superpower follows the same arc, from hard assets to paper promises, and from paper promises to total systemic collapse. In 2025, the United States is not merely fighting a political rival, it is fighting a 500-year-old mathematical law. When debt exceeds the capacity of the productive economy, the currency must eventually reset to zero. Portugal lived it, the Netherlands lived it, Britain lived it. The pattern is absolute, the math is cold, and we are simply the latest chapter in this recurring tragedy of arrogance. Stop viewing the news as a series of random political crises. What you are witnessing in 2025 is the cold, mechanical execution of Stage 6. The United States has officially crossed the Rubicon. The pattern that destroyed the pound and the guilder is now accelerating here, and the numbers are staggering. Our national debt has surpassed $36 trillion. To put that in perspective, we are now adding $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. The math is simple and devastating. The interest alone on this debt is consuming more of our budget than our entire national defense. We are no longer an empire with a debt problem. We are a debt bubble with a military. But debt is only the fuel. The spark that ignited Stage 6 was the fatal mistake of Stage 5, the weaponization of the dollar. In 2022, when the United States froze $300 billion of Russian foreign reserves, the global elite didn't see a moral victory. They saw a warning. They realized that if the dollar is no longer a neutral store of value, but a political weapon, then holding it is a liability. This single act shattered 50 years of trust. It told every nation, from Brazil to India to Saudi Arabia, that their hard-earned wealth could be deleted with a single stroke of a pen in Washington. This is why Stage 6, the emergence of viable alternatives, is moving at light speed. The BRICS alliance is no longer a debating club, it is a lifeboat. When Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar, began accepting the yuan and exploring digital payment systems outside of the SWIFT network, the monopoly ended. Unlike the British pound, which took decades to decline, the dollar's exit is being accelerated by technology. In the 1900s, capital moved by ship and telegraph. Today, capital moves with a click, Information spreads in seconds. The moment the world perceives a better alternative, the flight from the dollar will not be a slow walk. It will be a digital stampede. Some will tell you that America's military or technological lead will save us. They are wrong. History proves that you cannot shoot your way out of a debt trap, and you cannot innovate your way out of a currency that has lost its trust. We have passed the point of no return. The free lunch is over. We are now in the phase where the world stops needing us before we stop needing them. Stage 6 is almost complete. Stage 7 is coming. As the momentum of Stage 6 becomes irreversible, we must confront the 3 probable endgames for the American dollar. The first scenario is the multipolar fracture. In this reality, the dollar loses its throne, not to a single successor, but to a chaotic group of regional currencies. Trade becomes slower, more expensive, and far more political. This is the definitive end of globalism as we knew it. The second scenario is the rise of a commodity-linked BRICS currency. This is the return of financial gravity. For 50 years, the world traded real resources for our digital promises. Now, they are designing a system where money is once again anchored to physical reality: gold, oil, and wheat. This would effectively turn the US dollar into a stranded asset, locked out of the world's most productive markets in the East. The third and most devastating scenario for the average person is the great monetary reflow. If the world no longer needs dollars to buy energy or settle trade, the $36 trillion currently circulating in foreign reserves will begin a violent journey back to American shores. This is a mathematical certainty that few are prepared for. When these trillions flood back into the domestic economy, they will ignite a hyperinflationary spiral that has the power to erase the purchasing power of the middle class in a single decade. The elite in Washington are not ignoring this. They are desperate. In 2025, we see them using their final survival mechanisms, weaponizing interest rates to force capital back to New York and using military posturing to maintain the petrodollar's ghost. But history teaches us that military might without economic solvency is a recipe for an even faster collapse. You cannot shoot your way out of a debt trap, and you cannot enforce trust with a bayonet. The paradox of this endgame is that the more the system tightens its grip, the more the world pulls away. We are approaching the final reset, the moment where wealth is transferred from those holding paper to those holding reality. The exit is narrow and the clock is ticking. In every systemic collapse, wealth never truly vanishes. It simply changes hands. This is the brutal reality that university textbooks ignore, because if the masses understood the mechanics of the wealth transfer, there would be a revolution before sunset. We are currently witnessing the greatest extraction in human history. As we transition from Stage 6 to Stage 7, the system identifies its victims and its victors with cold mathematical precision. The losers are always the same: the middle class, the savers, and the retirees. If you hold your life's work in United States dollars, or if your future depends on a government pension, you are holding a depreciating liability. Inflation is not an accident of the market. It is a silent parasitic tax designed to liquidate the $36 trillion of national debt at your expense. When the Federal Reserve prints trillions of dollars in a single year, they are not creating wealth. They are diluting yours. Your savings account is not a store of value. It is the fuel for the fire that will burn the debt away. But who wins? In the 1920s and the 1940s, and today in 2025, the winners are the financial elite, the central bankers, and the smart money that owns hard assets. They understand the Cantillon effect. Those who are closest to the money printer receive the new currency first, before it loses its purchasing power. They use this fresh money to buy up land, energy production, and gold, while the public is lured into holding paper. When the currency reset finally happens, the elite will have their debts erased by inflation, while their physical assets remain. This is not a flaw in the system. This is the design. The financial architecture was built to suck value upward during every crisis. The powerful families who survived the fall of the British pound are the same ones positioning themselves for the end of the dollar. They don't care about flags. They care about the pattern. You must decide today if you are the fuel for this reset, or if you will follow the math toward survival. The realization that you are trapped inside a mathematical sequence is the first step toward survival. Most people will spend the next few years waiting for a political savior or a market recovery that is never coming. They are waiting for the system to fix itself, not realizing that the system is functioning exactly as intended. If you are to survive the transition into Stage 7, the phase of violent panic and loss of confidence, you must adopt the playbook of the global elite. They do not hold their wealth in the currency they print. They hold it in the things that the currency cannot create. Your first priority is the total elimination of counterparty risk. In a digital financial system, your bank balance is not your money. It is merely a legal claim on a bank's ability to pay you. During the great monetary reflow, those claims will be frozen, devalued, or simply deleted to protect the system. The smart money has already begun moving into the only 3 pillars of survival: physical sovereignty, hard assets, and real productivity. Hard assets are the ultimate shield against a Stage 6 collapse. Gold and silver have survived every reserve currency reset in the last 5,000 years for one reason: they cannot be printed into oblivion by a central bank. They represent physical reality in a world of digital illusions. Beyond precious metals, you must look toward productive land and essential resources. In a post-dollar world, the person who owns the energy, the food, and the physical means of production will hold the power, while the person holding a digital pension will hold a ghost. Finally, you must realize that the window to exchange your paper for reality is closing. As the national debt accelerates toward $40 trillion, the exit door is narrowing. Do not wait for the panic of Stage 7 to begin your transition. Position yourself now, while the free lunch is still technically on the menu, but the kitchen is already on fire. The math is certain. The cycle is absolute. Your survival depends on whether you trust the paper or the pattern. The 8-stage cycle is not a theory. It is a law of financial gravity. From the Portuguese real to the British pound, every global reserve currency has bowed to the same mathematical fate. We have analyzed how dominance leads to debt, and debt leads to the inevitable weaponization of money. In 2025, the United States has cleared the first 5 hurdles and is now deep within Stage 6. The petrodollar is dying, and the rise of alternatives is no longer a debate. It is an observation. Stage 7, the moment of violent systemic panic, is approaching faster than the elite want you to believe. History does not repeat, but it rhymes with terrifying precision. If you want to understand the milestones of this collapse and protect your family from the coming reset, you must watch the patterns, not the propaganda. Subscribe now to track every development of Stage 6. The cycle is moving. The math is final. Ensure you are on the right side of history before the reset begins.